Welcome back. It's good to be back. We've got 5 inches of fresh snow out there, just fell the day before yesterday, and it's wet. It's still clinging to the trees. I mean, it looks beautiful, but it's not really what I like to have. I don't. I no longer go on the ski slopes and things like that. So winter can be quite boring trying to get through it. And lately, I've been working some chores around the house, trying to get some repairs done. You're just trying to maintain a house is a job in itself. So I apologize for not peeking around lately. But what I thought I'd do, in fact, yesterday I decided I should catch up on the questions and just the email that I get, the comments that I get, just to see what I might have missed. So I ran across a bunch of questions, and I try to answer them personally, but I also took note of the questions so I can basically inform everybody. So if you bear with me, I've got a few here. It says, I just bought some cheap range ammo, and as it turns out, the bullets have a brass coating. Would this cause any unusual problem? No. Brass is certainly a malleable substance, and it's simply, it could be plating or it could be an actual brass jacket, but either way, it's of no concern. That will pass down the board just fine, and there's no harm that would be ever done with the. It's an alternative. It's an alternative to using standard gilding metal. Whether it would be classified as good ammo, it's a matter of just determining that for yourself and seeing if it's accurate. And my personal experience is, don't read a book by its cover. When it comes to ammunition, try ammunition out and see if it works, because sometimes what looks like the cheap ammo actually can shoot very, very well. It can shoot at least as good and sometimes better than the name brand stuff, or even the so-called premium stuff. So give it a chance. And just to talk about that for a moment, premium grade ammo generally is, especially with rifle ammo and handgun ammo, it's generally supposed to be made in a slower production, tighter quality control issues and things like that. So most of the time, if you compare all premium ammo across the board, you'll find differences in the way they perform in your gun. But all premium ammo should perform better than standard grade ammo, or so-called bargain grade ammo, which is run at a high speed and perhaps doesn't have the close attention to tolerances. But it should be safe, sure. Here's one here. David asks. He says, I have an odd question. Say you want to shoot 38-44 heavy duty. No, we're not talking about 38-40s. We're talking 38-44 is a cartridge that came out around 1930, 1929, 1930, and it was Smith & Wesson's first foray into the, magnumizing the 38 special. And this is in an era before people could sue, somebody because they dropped coffee in their lap. It was up to you to mind your own P's and Q's and to be safe. And you didn't have warnings on guns, you didn't have warnings on chainsaws or anything like that. You knew that spinning steel was dangerous, and you knew that bullets coming out of the other end of a gun was dangerous. So, but this was in that day before litigious consciousness rose its ugly head. So a 38-44 was basically a souped-up 38 special, and this was before the 357 Magnum came out in 1935. Smith & Wesson produced a special gun for it called the Outdoorsman. It was built on a end frame, the same size end frame that's used for the 44 Magnum, the Model 29, and the Model 27, the 357 Magnum. But the difference was that the cylinder was still short for 38 special size ammunition. So what he asks is, he says, say you want to shoot that 38-44 heavy duty with original power loads, using 357 cases cut down to 38 special because you don't want to load hot 38 head stamp and risk getting into a 38 special revolver. Okay, in other words, the question is here, He doesn't desire to take a risk of loading these hot 3844 loads into a standard 38 special cartridge case. You can't get 3844 brass anymore. It's long obsolete, but he doesn't want to load hot 38 special ammo that might get into a standard 38 and potentially rupture the gun, and that would seriously be that's a certain problem. So he wants to use 357 cases because they're marked on the end. It shows that they're a different head stamp, and that would certainly be a plausible option. You could also too simply color the case heads. You know, you can just use a Sharpie or a magic marker, red magic marker or a Sharpie or something, and color the case heads. Put a stripe down the side of the brass or something to designate it as special ammo, so basically you'd be alerted to it. All in all, I would say that I wouldn't bother, to be honest with you. The gain that you're going to get, you're probably going to gain somewhere around 150 feet per second for 38 special ammo versus 3844 ammo. The difference was in the day with 158 grain bullets. It was running about 1,050 feet per second or so, which was certainly hot 38 special ammo, and it's hotter than 38 special plus P. But frankly, I wouldn't bother. There's really nothing to be gained by souping up loads like that. And frankly, there's no information available from any source that's reliable that you can use to work up loads. And handguns in particular are very, very sensitive. You just can't work up loads until you get to a point where there's pressure signs, because the pressure sign will be when your cylinder splits in two. It's a whole different game than working up loads for a rifle. There's no way to tell until there's some real danger going on. So I would stay away from it. The standard powder used back in that day for loading that cartridge was typically 2400, which at that time was Hercules. Now it's Alliant. And if you want to use 2400 powder, and take your chances, call Alliant and see if they have any loads that they can recommend for the 3844. I'd be very surprised if they would respond about that, because they probably don't even have any resources themselves to determine that. But give it a try. But I would be more inclined towards, yes, you can trim down 357 brass. To me, that's a waste of good brass. I would just simply color the brass and make it distinctive. That's all. So 295 writes, I've been considering a Model 19, and after seeing your video, I don't see why a new 19 Classic won't fit my needs for virtually the same money as an older one that has possibly been buggered up over the years. Well, you probably got a good sense in your head there, 295. I'm referring back. This refers back to a video I did about the new Model 19 Classic that Smith & Wesson is producing. I'm very familiar with the old Model 19. You can watch that video where I compare them. I'm very familiar with the old Model 19. I own two of them. I shot them in competition. They're fabulous guns, but they had certain weaknesses that were built into them just because of their design. They had a flat spot on the bottom of the barrel to allow the gas ring to get by when the cylinder was closed. That caused a weakness in those guns. Right there at the forcing cone. That oftentimes started to split after many firings. Another issue was, of course, the old screw at the bottom. This yoke. I got lights in my eyes here. This yoke screw right here, the front screw, would, because of the recoil, would bear in, and we're talking about recoil that's in a lighter gun than it is in a Model 27. So with 357 ammo, the cylinder would really rock, and it would cause that yoke to start battering against the yoke screw. and that caused looseness, and eventually, you had to have it repaired. You have to have the yoke tightened up, or you have to have replace the yoke screw. It's a McGilly you don't have to have anymore. Those are good guns. They're great guns. They're fantastic collector's piece and everything, but they haven't been made for close to 25 years now, and so even the newest of them they're getting on. The older ones are pretty well worn, and to bring them back up to standard condition would be a problem, because I believe the Smith & Wesson will only work on guns going back to 1964. So a great many of those old Model 19s are simply not going to be viable for being reserviced and restored to standard condition by Smith & Wesson. So I know it's got this little locking device here, but if you can close your eyes and hold your nose, if that's something that bothers you, I don't know why such a little trivial thing like that should be an issue, but this is a highly revised gun. Aside from its looks, there's an awful lot. If you watch my video, there's an awful lot that Smith & Wesson did to improve the reliability and the serviceability and the durability of this gun over its predecessor. I just make a little note about that. Many of the revisions that Smith & Wesson began to do was very, very soon after the Ruger GP 100 came out, because a lot of police departments, this is just prior to when automatics came into, semi-automatic handguns came into use in police departments. The GP 100 went off the shelves like crazy. Police departments couldn't. I had police departments calling me because our department was the first in the nation to receive them, being that we're in New Hampshire, and we had a large department, and because of that, we were the first ones to get them. And I had a lot of departments calling me and asking me what I thought, and I said, well, they're extremely strong guns. Maybe the trigger pull isn't quite as refined as a Smith & Wesson, but all our officers are doing very well with it. They're qualifying with it, and there's absolutely no concerns about durability. So shortly after that, Smith & Wesson was learning that they probably, I'm speaking probably out of turn here because I can't say what was going on in the boardroom, but it's very, very coincidental that Smith & Wesson began to take note of the long-standing weaknesses of their revolvers when the Ruger GP 100 came out. I'm glad they did. That's what competition is all about. That's why I love to see competition. I don't like to see one company gobble up another because they're gobbling up the competition too. So that's it. Yes, I think it's a great idea. That's a fantastic gun. It's got so many refinements that, plus it's got a stainless steel barrel, even though it's shrouded with this black steel. The barrel is a separate component from the shroud that goes around it. It's a great gun. So, do you need a rimfire scope and AO, adjustable objective? Well, yes. That's not to say that you can't just take a standard, centerfire design scope and put it on top of 22. You can certainly do that. You're going to see out of it, and you're going to have crosshairs. Everything's going to work just ducky. There's a couple of problems, however, that I described in my rimfire video, my rimfire scope video. Scopes for rifles, centerfire rifles, are generally set with the parallax setting. The internal parallax setting is generally set to 150 yards, and in some cases 100 yards, maybe even 125 yards. But Leupold, for instance, sets the parallax at 150 yards for a centerfire scope. That parallax setting makes sure that when your eye is not dead center down the middle of that scope tube, it makes that crosshair present itself exactly where the target is at 150 yards. That's presuming it doesn't have adjustable objective. A rimfire scope is set, Leupold, I'm using Leupold as an example, Leupold sets their rimfire scope parallax setting at 60 yards. And 60 yards is the ideal parallax setting for a rimfire, for a 22 Magnum, 17 HMR, whatever it is. I mean, that puts the parallax dead on at that very intermediate range where it's anything closer than that is not going to be sufficiently off target to miss a small critter, and beyond that, it's the same issue. It's not going to be sufficiently off target to miss even out to 125 yards. So 60-yard parallax setting is the ideal, and that's where a rimfire scope comes into play. So what about AO? Well, AO would certainly satisfy that situation even with a centerfire scope. However, a 22 scope with AO is still a better choice because you have, generally speaking, you have smaller, finer crosshairs. When I say finer, you know, the inside of a duplex reticle will oftentimes be finer than put it this way, the outside of the duplex reticle will be finer than the inside is on a centerfire scope reticle. So it's a much finer crosshair that won't obscure small game. If you're hunting squirrels and you see a squirrel at 15 yards up in a tree and you put your centerfire crosshair on it, you're very likely going to be obscuring most of his head because of the size of the reticle. And not only that, but a lot of AO scopes for centerfire rifles simply will not focus very well down below, say, 25 or 30 yards. They simply refuse to focus at those ranges inside 25 or 30 yards. And if that's the case, I say you're not going to have much to shoot at when you're plinking with a 22. So, in all situations, a rimfire scope is much more satisfactory, whether it's AO or non-AO. AO is a great scope. I've got an AO scope on my, it's a Hawkeye that I've got on my Beeman R7 pellet rifle, and I mean it focuses down to about 10 feet, and this beautiful crystal clear, very inexpensive scope. I paid less than $100 for a 3 to, I think it was 3 to 9. So yes, always get a. I'd say you do need a rimfire scope. And possibly with AO for any rimfire. Okay, Pete writes, you got to be from Maine with that Moxie hat on. My favorite drink. You're talking about this stuff right here. I do love this stuff. I mean, I'll have a nice bourbon, in the evening, or I'll have a scotch or something like that with my pipe or my cigar. But he's talking about this hat here, so. Yeah, I'm a Moxie fan, but no, I'm not from Maine. I have ancestors. I have ancestors that were in the Searsport and Belfast area, Wiscasset, Damascotta, all those places up there along the seacoast. They were mariners. They were fishermen. So I have a lot of that in my blood, but no, Benny was a Mainer. He was a native Mainer. Every time we drove through his town, he somehow mystically he sat up in the back seat and he looked out in the same direction that his original abode was. So they do know, dogs have made it back home from coast to coast. And cats have done the same thing. So somehow or another, they have a GPS compass in their brain or something that knows. He always knew when he was going by his house. Says Frill writes from Sweden, and howdy back to Sweden. I've been to Scandinavia. I've been to Norway twice, and it's a wonderful country. It's very much like New Hampshire, although you can get up into the northern reaches, and when we were up to Lillehammer during the '94 Olympics, that was up there a little ways, and it was some cold and dark too during the wintertime. Long shadows. You stand there in the middle of the street and you can see your shadow down 3 blocks away. It says, I consider casting outside in the spring. He's talking about bullet casting. What about the lead fumes outside? Well, that's the preferred way to go. Anytime you're casting lead inside, it's very, very dangerous. And the outfit that I showed you in a couple of videos, I made a very strong vent that's close to the furnace that can draw out those fumes. But even then, there's residual fumes that because you're working with that smoke and you're close to it. There's some activity there that can lead you to exposure, which is why you really need to wear a good certified mask for that. Like a 3M mask that's filtered. But outdoors is always preferred. It really is. If you can set up a good solid bench outside in the spring and protected from the weather, I've done it out in my barn where I have, at the doorway of the barn where I have a good breeze. But you don't want to have a strong wind. I use my furnace naturally for the lead casting furnace for casting bullets, but I also use a large cast iron pot. A stable pot, or you can even use a large cast iron fry pan, an old fry pan that you're never going to use again, and you can put it over a turkey fryer burner, that sort of thing. But you've got to have a mild breeze that'll keep you can stay upwind from it, and make sure that you don't have too much of a breeze that's going to be causing the flames to wash away. And you want to have a good stable temperatures and everything. So yeah, it always is a good idea, Phil, to make sure that you cast outside whenever you can. Laredo asks, would a long bullet fired at high velocity be more stable than the same bullet at a slower velocity? Now you can watch my video on bullet stability, rifling stability, and what rifling twists and things like that, and I describe this stuff in long detail. But essentially, when a bullet is stabilized, it's stabilized. There is such a thing as a marginally stable bullet. That is a bullet which it would take very little to disrupt its flight. But generally speaking, a stabilizing twist for a bullet, it won't get any more stable once you fully stabilize it. But the concept is, you can have situations with certain guns that will reveal a problem, and I explained this in a video that I think was in that same video. I had a 10-inch barreled contender pistol, Thompson Center contender pistol, and it was an older. It was made in 1973, it was chambered in .222 Remington. It was a beautiful handgun, but the standard factory ammunition that you'd buy off the shelf with it, which was 50 grain bullets. They were very, very marginally stabilized. The accuracy was pretty shabby. And that same ammo out of my .222, my Tikka bolt action rifle, stabilized perfectly. And I could see certainly on the paper, I could see where the bullets were not going in straight. The holes were elliptical, like an egg shape. So I knew, and they were flying into the, even at 50 yards, I was getting groups this big, which I know that's not typical of a Thompson Center contender. But when I reduced the bullet weights to 45 grains, I had no problems at all, because I was able to increase the velocity sufficiently so that it would stabilize them. And also, too, the shorter bullet didn't need to be spun quite as quickly. The problem is when a manufacturer of a gun uses the same twist as he shortens the barrel instead of increasing the twist rate. So the twist rate was the same on that. I believe it was 1 in 14 twist on that handgun. So the problem was because the barrel had been shortened from a standard length of maybe 24 to 22 inches, 24 inches, down to 10 inches. The velocity was not high enough to really spin the RPMs, which is necessary to attain that stability. And that's what the whole point of the twist is to create RPM. the faster the velocity, even though a bullet will only travel, even though it only travels downrange with the same twist regardless, if it has a 1 in 12 twist, it's always gonna spin once every 12 inches all the way to its terminus, all the way to the target. But the RPMs are going to be different. If you fire it out of a longer barrel gun, the RPMs are going to certainly be greater because the velocity is greater. The faster you push that bullet down the barrel, the more it spins. If you've ever had, a wind-up top or something like that, you can see how that works. So, generally speaking, if you have a stability problem with a particular barrel, you have to reduce the length of your bullet, and Laredo has it right. It's a long bullet. It's not a weight issue. It's a length issue. So anytime you have a long bullet, you can be reaching the end of a stability issue with a given barrel. It's very common to have. You could have 5 different bullets from different brands, all exactly the same weight, and all the same type of point, but they can be different lengths because the ogive can be longer or more slender, or it can have a boat tail. Anytime you add a long, slender shape in addition to a boat tail, you're going to have a longer bullet, and in some situations you're not going to be able to stabilize it. And that's why the military needed to have 1 in 7 twists on short 14-inch, 16-inch barrels, simply because they needed to have that stability in order to spin their 62-grain steel core bullets. So that's it, yes. And Jeff writes, what's my experience with using a baffle in the hopper for the powder measure? And he relates that he has experience in high-speed food packaging equipment and using volumetric filling and all that stuff. And they have problems with standard deviation and weighting of the final packaged product. Well, I spoke about this when I was putting together that Frankfort Arsenal press when I was mounting the powder hopper. In my personal experience, and I've worked with, in one video I showed you just a sample of how many powders I've used. I've used so many powders over my life. I've probably used most of them. And I've used most of them through powder measures too. And powder does not settle like, for instance, cornflakes in a box or something. You'll see on the side of a package of cornflakes or something like that. Package may have settled, during shipment and handling, so it's not necessarily full. Well, powder does that very, very slightly, hardly at all. If you have a 270 case, for instance, and you're filling it up with 4831 powder, not the shortcut, but the old 4831 powder, a top end load of 60 grains or 61 grains or something, it's not going to necessarily get into that case unless you use a long drop tube in order to allow it to align itself and stack inside the case. And so you'll achieve maybe a quarter of an inch more filling in that case, a quarter inch more space to fill it by using that technique. But I have never seen where I did some testing back about 25 years ago. My buddy and I were very much into that. My late friend was very much into that. He was wondering himself. We went through a whole process one night where we were trying different kinds of powder through a Uniflow powder measure, the same one that I'm using now. And we had a baffle. He had made a brass baffle. It's just the same exact thing that comes with them now. It's like a tent with holes on the side of it and everything. But it was a baffle to basically keep pressure off the bottom of the powder. That's what the whole point is. The baffle is at the bottom of that hopper, and it basically keeps the pressure, the weight of the powder above it, off of it, so it remains consistent. So that all the powder that goes into the case is coming out at the same pressure. But as I say, powder doesn't seem to work that way. We didn't see any difference whatsoever. We were measuring very, very carefully, and we saw no difference. We ran like a string of 10 cases filled with a certain powder with the hopper completely full. We'd even bang on the side of the hopper and, to get it to settle, to see if it would change. And then we'd load it with just, the last inch and a half of powder in the hopper and try it with, we were getting over, averaging 10 cases. We were getting exactly the same charges regardless of powder. Ball powders, spherical powders were always stacking exactly the same no matter what anyway. Extruded powders, they really they didn't change. I mean, the way a powder measure works, all its weight, the base of the powder measure is basically a big funnel, and all the weight is on that funnel. It doesn't create weight on the little hole in the middle of the funnel. You basically it's bridging all the way down. In other words, that structure of powder is bridging itself all the way down, and it's coming out of that hole, which is only in the middle of that broader funnel. So we saw absolutely no change. So I don't even use them anymore. They're a pain in the neck. It's more difficult to empty the powder measure afterwards and everything. It doesn't hurt to use them, but I have found absolutely no need to use them whatsoever. Okay, I noticed that you're loading 223 and military 5.56 cases. So does the powder charge stay the same for the 223 and the 5.56? Well, when it comes to 308 versus 762 military cases, there's a decided difference in the density of the case. The weight of military 762 cases is almost always considerably more weight than a 308 case. So the internal volume, a heavier case with the outside dimensions being the same, the internal volume is going to be less. So that's the case. That is the situation with 308 and 762 cases. I've not seen that situation with 5.56 cases. In fact, I've seen sometimes where certain commercial cases can even be a little bit heavier. So I just mix them. There is some accuracy difference certainly if you're mixing brass, because you can have with 223 cases you can have differences of up to 4 grains. Within one manufacturer, you may have differences of only maybe 1/2 to 3/4 of a grain, which in a 223 case is not much at all. But when you're talking about changing brands, you can have differences of 4, maybe even 5 grains of brass, and that can be significant. But I did not find that that's necessarily true because it's military brass, but it might be it may be some other brass. It might be one of the Korean brands or something like that. So no, and in any case, it doesn't make any difference as long as you're loading for a modern firearm and you're loading within the pressure limits that are given in the written specifications for powder. My favorite powder for loading 223 cases and 5.56 ammo. Even if I don't use 5.56 loading data because I see absolutely no need to drive my bullets another 150, 125 feet per second faster with more pressure. It just simply doesn't. I don't need it. But I use CFE 223. I think, judging by the specifications on the load and the velocities that you achieve, I think it's essentially a very similar component as Ball C2 powder. And Ball C2 powder was a very, very popular powder for the 223 over the years, and for the 222, and all those cartridges built on that 222 parent case. So no, there's no concern. If you're looking for utmost accuracy, always segregate your brass according to weight. That's the way it goes. And the problem with that is that if you segregate it according to weight, one weight's probably going to give you better accuracy than another, and then you got to find a load for every one of those weights. So if you're shooting it out of a Mini 14 or AR-15 or something like that, and you know, for that sort of purpose, I see absolutely no need to concern yourself with it. If you're a real fastidious target shooter, you're going to have to buy all your brass from one source and make sure it's very high quality brass, like generally speaking, Lockwood brass, or one of those foreign brands that they really buckle down and keep the weights dead on. They're right on the money. Douglas writes, "Howdy." Well, you got to be from west of the Mississippi, I would say, with howdy. "Thank you for another enjoyable video." It says, "I just bought a 1959 to Model 60 Model 41 and noticed that what looks like chipped gold plating flaking off the rear face of the front sight. Did some of these guns with gold-plated front sights?" So here's a Model 41 of which he speaks. This is a all these guns, by the way, I've checked them before I started the video. This is probably one of the classiest. I mean, really, this is one of the classiest guns that I think that Smith & Wesson ever made. It is the classiest gun that Smith & Wesson ever made. Absolutely no question about it. This is the Model 41 is a target grade 22 long rifle. They made it for a time. They made it in 22 short. And the barrel can be different lengths. This one here is the long barrel version. But what he's asking is on the back, the rear surface of the cartridge sight, if gold was ever a offering. No, not to my knowledge. It was very popular, you know. It's always been very popular through the years, especially with bullseye shooters, to use red paint. They'd use their wife's nail polish, red nail polish or something, or they'd go into the art shops, maybe even to the model shops and get some model testers, model paint. You know, you could get it with the gold, and you could paint it on the back. And I suspect that that's all he did. I suspect that's all somebody did. As a former electroplater, I can tell you the process that you would have to go through to mask this entire part to prevent it from being gold plated would be a very laborious and time consuming job to plug the barrel, blah blah blah, and you'd have to have the resources of gold plating equipment in order to do that. And yes, there have been some some little hobby gizmos that have been produced over the years that you can kind of paint on gold and stuff like that. I remember my boss bought one of those years ago, back in the 60s, and tried it. He laughed. He said, there's more to, as we knew, there was more to plating than just simply rubbing instruments together. It's a very laborious job. So anyway, that's a long way to answer the simple question. No, it's just an applied. I'm sure it's just an applied finish that could probably be removed with lacquer thinner or something. Let's see. Are modern 44 Magnums good with Magnum loads, say the Model 629-8, or is it still an issue with modern production as well? Well, I alluded to I specifically mentioned in at least one, maybe more than one video, that, as I said, there were certain weaknesses inherent with the Model 19 because the Model 19 was being driven, basically it was driven beyond its speed capabilities. It was a lightweight K-frame. This was something that was asked for by many people. They didn't want to carry a Model 27, an N frame around. They wanted to have a light K frame, say in a Model 10 M&P frame, but they wanted to have it chambered for 357. So Smith & Wesson and Jordan wanted that too. They basically got together and they put together the 357 by reaming out a longer cylinder, and they gave it that job, and that's essentially what happened to the Model 29. The Model 29 was also driven beyond its capabilities by basically making a 44 special gun into a 44 Magnum gun without changing the basic design quality of the, again, it's that yoke screw and a couple of other issues. So it was common for them to break down and to really start rattling and going bad with not too many loads. My teacher at Smith & Wesson, when I was at the Smith & Wesson Armor School for 2 weeks down in Springfield, he had unkind words for that gun because he was one of the people responsible for basically restoring them and getting them back to people and trying to fix them, and sometimes they were beyond easy repair. They had been so badly shaken up by shooting 44 Magnum loads all the time. Well, this one here is a Model 629. It's current production. It's got the silly hole on the side and all those things. I'm not crazy about this adaptation of the way the thumb piece now is. It's not as big as it used to be, and to me it's not as nicely shaped. But this gun here will handle 44 Magnum loads all day long. This gun here is a very, very stout gun. It has an entirely different situation up the front. It doesn't have the same locking system as the Model 19 Classic. They still retain some of the old styling, but this gun certainly will handle 44 Magnum loads, unlike the old Model 29. So yes, this is a stouter gun, and it really will stand up just fine. They finally put it together the way it needed to be. Let's see, page 2. What do we got? Well, Charlie writes that he has a real problem with his Model 99 Savage 308. He said that the trigger pull is too heavy for me. Can it be made lighter? Well, my Model 99 Savage had an extraordinarily crisp trigger, very, very light. In fact, it was only about 2 3/4 pounds. It was like a target trigger. It was fabulous. He's apparently having an issue with his. And a lot of Model 99s were made in earlier days. Later days in the 70s and 80s when they really were having problems with the machinery that was making them and everything. So there were some guns that were coming out in the later days that didn't have as fine a trigger. Well, the answer is simply, any good gunsmith can reduce that trigger weight for you very nicely and can crisp it up. That's a pretty simple trigger to work on. So I would just simply bring it to a good gunsmith, and I don't know what it would cost. It'd probably be somewhere around an hour. It should be no more than an hour and a half labor, whatever that would be. But yes, they can be made into a really nice trigger. Now here's PPI Safety writes to me, I have 3 Smith & Wesson revolvers from the 70s that have the same problem. They were all working fine when they were put away some years ago, but after 10 years they stick when I try to open them. The ejector rods are tight. Well, let's see. The problem typically when you have an old gun that's been sitting around a long time, sometimes it doesn't have to be sitting around. Sometimes it just occurs. But I would have people bring me guns years ago, and I mean I've had Model 94s that you barely could rack the handle, and Marlin 336 is the same way. I've seen where triggers were very, very sluggish, where they almost didn't want to return. Even in a bolt action rifle, I've seen bolt action rifles where they wouldn't set, they wouldn't cock. They pull the bolt back and pull it forward, and the trigger would and the sear would not connect. And it was usually always the same problem. It was gelled oil that had basically congealed. Somebody had used some sort of oil that had congealed and turned yellow and rancid. And there were a lot of oils that people used through the years that sometimes would do that. My experience with a 3-in-1 oil can do that. Even on the outside of the can, it gets that yellow gunky look, and it's sticky, and that's why I don't use 3-in-1 oil. That was made for bicycle chains, and it's good for that, but it's not a gun oil, regardless of what they say on the can. The best thing to do for something like that is to take it apart as much as you can. You know, break it down as much as you can. I would take the segregate that particular screw. If you want, you can follow my video on how to dismantle a Smith & Wesson. But at the very least, you want to remove the cylinder, and using the method I spoke of, where you hold the cylinder in place and withdraw the yoke from the cylinder. Don't ever drag the cylinder across the front of the gun. There's probably gunk built up that you may not even be able to see it if it's blue, if it's a blue gun. But there's probably gunk built up between the ejector star and the cylinder, and that will increase the spacing. There's probably also gunk built up in between the center pin and the ejector rod, and that can cause issues. At the front of this one here doesn't have that. That's got a different type of cylinder. But at the front end here, you have a locking bolt. That's this little silver pin that's retained with a cross pin. You can use, and there's a hole in the front. It's milled out. You can expect that to get gummed up so that locking bolt is not free to move. So any place that you can, soak it in a semi-volatile solvent such as mineral spirits. Just regular mineral spirits should do the job. Use a M16 brush or something with mineral spirits. Let it soak for a few hours. If that doesn't seem to remove it, then jump up to a more volatile solvent such as naphtha. Now naphtha is, you can get a gallon of Coleman fuel. That's naphtha, or so-called white gas. But you can get it in a simple small can of lighter fluid. That's naphtha too. So use that, and that should certainly dissolve any crud. But that should bring it back to working order very quickly. And again, don't oil the inside of a revolver. Don't drizzle oil down the side, because that's what happens. It gets gunked up and caked up and everything. So open up the gun if you can, according to the instructions I gave, and make sure you go through the whole thing and follow my instructions on how to basically apply just a microscopic film of oil with a fine brush. You can use a paintbrush, an Irish paintbrush to do it, and wipe out the excess with gun patches. Just to color the metal dark. Let's see. Invisible writes, it's been almost 7 years since this video was made. I know what he's referring to, the video I made on selecting my list of deer cartridges. And I didn't give the 6.5 Creedmoor its due at the time. Well, 7 years ago, the Creedmoor had spotty popularity throughout the country. It appeared that it was being appreciated by a lot of people, but it was not widely distributed around the country, and it was not widely accepted by most, I would say, by the lion's share of people in the country. And I'm not a speculative person when it comes to buying guns. I don't, the history of cartridge failures in this country has been pretty high. It's like going into the restaurant business. For every 3 new cartridges, you're lucky if one will last, and then there's always one close on its heels to knock it off its high pedestal. So I'm always very, very reluctant to recommend, in a list of cartridges that I would recommend. I'm always very, very reluctant to go out on a limb for people and recommend something that they might find as a maverick a few years later. So yes, I would say the 6.5 Creedmoor is here to stay. For a deer cartridge, that's more than sufficient. That's all you need. Again, at that time, the 260 Remington was having a hard time getting off the ground, and it had been around a long time. And people were confusing until recently, metric cartridges haven't done very well in this country. Now they're starting to catch hold because we've got a new generation of shooters, and there's no bias about metric cartridges. But so yes, the 6.5 Creedmoor. I'll have to take it back and apologize. The 6.5 Creedmoor is a fine cartridge. Just don't expect it to be a moose killer and all that. I know that I know it can. There are a lot of cartridges that have been taken beyond their capabilities, but it's still a small cartridge. It's a relatively small cartridge with a 6.5 diameter bullet. So it can't be, the ballistic can't be made more than it is. Is there any reason not to put studs into the cover plate, side plate holes on the Frankfort Arsenal X10, putting wing nuts on instead of using, those little hex head screws, cap screws? Well, and they're streamlined. They're a very smooth screw that's hard to handle. Yeah, you can do that. I mean, that'd be one way around it. You could get a stud and you could thread it in there and then put a wing nut on it and everything. That's a lot of work. I think the easiest thing to do would be just get an electric screwdriver. You can buy it. You can go to any hardware store. You can buy yourself a battery operated or rechargeable electric screwdriver that'll do the same thing, and it'll back it right out. So that's probably that would be my option. Rather than defacing it and going through all the expense of putting a wing nut on there. So that'd be I always look for the easy way out. And even twirling a screwdriver is not that difficult. What is the proper way to close a cylinder, Shelley writes. Should it be by the crane or the cylinder? Well, if you're talking about a Colt or a Ruger, it's called a crane. If you're talking a Smith & Wesson, it's called a yoke. So the question is, should it be closed thusly with the cylinder, or should it be closed with right here, with the yoke or the crane? Well, I've seen a lot of nonsense written about this. No, always take the easy way out. The cylinder is there, it's big, you can't miss it, your thumb just closes right onto it. You're not going to stress it out any. There's absolutely no possible way. As soon as that comes into battery, as soon as that's closed, it's 100% supported. You can't push it too far. You can't push it too hard or anything like that. If you're closing it by these sharp pieces here, you could slice yourself. You don't want to be engaging these parts here or pinching yourself. There's no need to do that. There's a lot of sharp surfaces there. So no, just the simple way is the easy way. Just close it with the cylinder. Absolutely nothing to worry about. Anybody who tells you that you're going to damage the gun by closing the cylinder absolutely has no knowledge of these guns whatsoever. I'm an armorer that's trained by both Ruger and Smith & Wesson. I can guarantee you that these guns are designed to be closed like that. That's the way they're made. No problems whatsoever. Okay. An old school writes to me, you commented on glass bedding of the M1A. Just curious if you decided to do it, and if so, what were the results? Well, old school, you need to watch my videos. I did a whole series of videos on the M1A, the M14 design, and I glass bedded the rear sight that was a little bit wiggly. That was a huge issue. That's big problems. Anytime you have a wiggly sight, that can throw you off many inches. And I've been advised and informed by people since I did that video that they too have noticed that they had wiggly sights on this M1A standard. So that's not acceptable. Springfield Armory, you got a problem there. That is absolutely unacceptable. Sights, even my Daisy Red Ryder that I keep in the house here when the kids come up, that's got tight sights. I mean, tight sights, you have to have that. The whole process that I followed between shimming the gas block up front and glass bedding the gun, which was a very easy process. I showed you how I did it in real time online. and showed you how simple it was. It really made a remarkable difference. I went from having 10-inch groups down to having half-inch groups. So it made a very, very fine gun out of that M1A standard. I'm very happy with that gun, and you don't have to spend big money in order to get. My investment in that entire refurbishing was a little bit of DevCon epoxy, I think is what I used for the glass bedding of the site, and I'm not sure if I used Acro Glass or what it was, but I used a small amount of glass bedding, very small. It probably amounted to less than a tablespoon and a half all told. It's all the glass bedding does and I've had people give me some awful negative responses about the work I did. Oh, I had to carve out wood. I don't know what I was doing, and everything else. Well, I've been glass bedding guns for a lot longer than most of those people have been around on this planet. And I can tell you that all glass bedding does is it fills in the voids that manufacturing tolerances have left. It does not, with no gun do you have to be hogging out a lot of wood. All you have to do is simply rough up the surface sufficiently with a Dremel tool or a rough sandpaper so that it adheres, that there's nothing that is going to peel off of, and you apply the glass bedding, and that glass bedding is there to keep the receiver from rocking around. Results is what maybe upsets them that I got results, and they're probably waiting. I've had people say, well, about 500 rounds from now it won't be that way. Well, it'll be that way 5,000 rounds from now. I'll be replacing a barrel long before I'd be replacing the stock. Once that's in place, it's not battering around anymore. They're rocking and rolling together. They're in unison. When they're beating each other, then you have problems. Then you have stock cracking and all sorts of stuff. But as long as they're together, they ride. There's no battering of parts. So, the jealousy thing sometimes bugs me. People don't like to see easy ways to do it when everybody has been spending a lot of money and taking hours and days to glass bed an M1A. It's very simple. Watch my video there, old school, and you'll check it out. How do I take the screws out of the gas block of? I presume he's talking about. Well, I think he's talking about the M4 Mini 14. But in any case, I do believe I may have omitted that from when I pasted it in here. The Mini 14 gas block I've removed it, and I went through a package of different. I had 4 different orifices that I tried. And I went back to the factory orifice because the others simply weren't reliable. I had smaller ones, and to reduce the gas flow. And I was of the mind that by doing that, maybe I wouldn't have to go so far to retrieve my brass and things. That was the big thing, because brass, the Mini 14 will throw brass right into the next county. In fact, I know there's about 40 pieces of brass out there in one particular place that I went to. I never did find it. It was unbelievable. I was almost 20 yards from the nearest trees, and it was not to be found between me and the trees. So they really went a long way. But having said that, it's not a process that I would engage in. I would not recommend changing the orifice if you want to have a reliable Mini 14. Ruger knew what they were doing when they provided that size orifice. I'm sure that they're very well aware of how to manufacture a gun and how to make it reliable. And that's one of the attributes of the Mini 14, is it's extremely reliable. So, but the question is, if that's not the situation he wants to do, he got the two back screws out, but the 2 front ones are welded in place. He can't get them out. Well, any machinist, any mechanic knows that when you have more than one screw holding a big part in, or one part, a unitized part, you have to unwind the screws all together. In other words, you can't just take 2 screws out and expect the other 2 to come out, because they're going to be jammed in. Those screws are going to be holding what previously was being secured by 4. You've got to start by unwinding maybe only 10 minutes on the clock on each screw. Go back and do 10 minutes on the clock on each screw until all of a sudden when one screw starts to come out loosely, they'll all come out loosely. But if you just take a couple of the screws out, it's gonna bind those last 2 screws in. So that's how you do it, whether it's a engine block or whatever it is. So now I'll leave the first question I'll leave to last here. And this one can get me going. John asked me, I'm curious about your thoughts on higher-end semi-custom 1911. Do you consider production guns good enough for the average non-competitor? Do you consider the improved performance with high prices? I asked because blah, blah, blah. So, a standard grade Model 1911 made by most reputable manufacturers, and I'll use this Ruger here as an example, this Ruger SR 1911, and government models. I'm very, very familiar with government models. I carried 2 throughout my service time in the stateside and Vietnam. I shot them a lot. I know what they're capable of, and I was shooting on the Provost Marshal's pistol team down at Fort Polk. Those guns, rattle traps as they were capable of keeping all shots in a 8-inch bull at 50 yards. That's, in other words, the NRA bull is 8 inches in diameter, and at 25 yards is 5.5 inches in diameter. Those guns will keep all the shots, any good off-the-shelf 1911 standard, non-competitive model. You can almost be guaranteed that you're going to be shooting all shots into a bullseye at those standard ranges. If that's not enough for you, then you're apparently a competitor. If you're capable of keeping all your shots inside the bullseye, and you're looking for 10 rings and X rings, if you're that higher grade shooter, then you can look into a competitive model. And I don't think there's anything, for the price, I don't think there's anything in the world that I would even consider beyond a Gold Cup Colt. I've tested this gun now quite a lot since I got it a few months ago. This is one superb shooter. The trigger is as sweet as they come. I know triggers. This is a fantastic trigger. It's light and crisp. Now this is a national match trigger, so national match rules mean it has to be 4 pounds. But in 10 minutes, I can make this a 2.5 pound, 2 3/4 pound trigger, and it'd be very, very crisp and light. But this is a very crisp trigger, and it's accurate. .690. You know how big .690 is? It's just a little bit. It's between a half. It's about 5/8 of an inch. With my old eyes, with nothing more than sandbag rest, and doing it by hand without a machine rest, I'm shooting at 25 yard, shooting .690, .70, .75, those sort of groups. Like 7-shot groups. If anybody can honestly tell me that their $4,000 gun is shooting better than that, I really want to see it. I really want to see it, because I don't believe it. There are certain variables that start to come into play that have nothing to do with the gun at that point. Between the weather conditions, just a slight breeze. You can certainly have issues with the load. There is no such thing as a perfect load. There is no such thing as I've never seen in my life a handgun load that's perfect. They're not going to go down the same hole all the time. If you've got a gun that's shooting .690, that sort of performance. I even had one. I wouldn't use it as a standard comparison, but I even had one that was 5 shots into less than a half inch. So, there's a certain mystique that a lot of these custom gun makers want to. And by the way, so we're talking a little over $1,200 for this, which is about $300 or $400 more than a standard grade gun. It's a pretty good bargain for what you're getting. You know, custom guns, semi-custom guns are running, you know, $2,800, $3,500, $4,200. You got to be kidding me! $4,200 for the same amount of steel. These so-called custom gun makers, you know, or they're kind of they like to run this mystique, this image of, you know, Geppetto and Pinocchio and Figaro laying up on a pillow and everything, and he's in his little shop making guns one at a time while he's tapping away at his hammer and chisel. That's what they like to. That's the image that they like to put on. That may have been true back about, you know, back in the '60s, you know, when you had just a handful of, like, Jim Clark, you know, in Shreveport, Louisiana, was making custom 45s and custom Ruger pistols, 22 pistols and stuff. And he was working in such an environment where he was just, you know, just one lone gun maker. And when you put in an order for a gun, you could expect to wait a year and a half or 2 years before you got your gun, and that's the way things were. These custom gun makers, they have a whole list. You know, there's like 50 different models that they have of all different kinds of guns. You think it's a custom shop? You think it's a little quaint custom shop that's turning out that kind of production? No. And you can go online any place you want. You can go online and you can order them right now. They have the same availability or unavailability as any other gun on the market. So they're not as custom as you think. They're high production guns, and frankly, and this is where I get going, there's a limit to how much you can set up the tolerances between the slide and the frame. To some degree, to a small degree, those tolerances have an effect on accuracy, but there is a diminishing return after that. Once you have too tight a tolerance, then you have a gun that's not reliable. I'll take reliability. A gun. The whole purpose for buying a gun is so that it shoots. You don't want to have a gun where, you know, it fails to chamber properly because the slide is so tight, or it fails to cycle back and forth because it's so tight. You don't want to have those issues. You know, Colt and other companies have got, you know, they've got that down to where it's a reasonable compromise, where you get extremely good accuracy. You know, .70, .690. That's a pretty good amount of accuracy. Anybody who's capable of challenging that type of accuracy on the line, you know, standing there and shooting, and especially if you're you know, if you're shooting steel targets, you know, you're from behind a barricade and you're shooting plink, 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 plink. You're shooting that kind of ammo. You can shoot anything. You can shoot the oldest, most tired 1911 that was ever made, and you're going to be able to win those games. That's not the issue. So you know, mind your wallet, and don't let somebody be peeling that kind of money out of it. Be very, very sensible, and that's what he was asking me. You know, be sensible. Spend your money wisely. A standard grade 1911 made from a reputable manufacturer will serve probably, you know, 99% of all people out there. There are very few people who will appreciate the difference, except for perhaps the sights. You know, this is a Bomar sight. When you start getting Bomar sights, that crispness that you get for target shooting, you can't beat it. But you don't have to spend even $1,200 to get that. So that's all I have to say about that. So I appreciate you sticking with me, and my Patreon donors, I really appreciate your assistance. You're helping me out a lot. You know, as I say, things are getting a little tight here. I know that I could be online probably and giving you some more videos, but, you know, I'm just one guy. I don't have a videographer. I don't have somebody to, you know, to take care of putting it through my computer and all that stuff. It's just doing one of these videos is, even if I'm doing one like this that I don't require any editing, where I have to, when I say editing, I'm talking about if I do a video where I have several different shots where I have to, you know, view a handgun being taken apart from one side and then doing something with it another. I have maybe as much as 25 different clips that I have to sew together, and all that stuff. So it can take many hours by the time I get it done. So I'm not arguing with people's desires to see me and have more videos. But sometimes it's just a matter of my practical abilities between maintaining our own property here, and shoveling, snow blowing, and putting in a new tile floor in the bathroom, and all those things that any homeowner has to do. So be patient, but I do appreciate your financial assistance so that I can do the things that need to be done as far as having ammo for shooting and everything. And I'll certainly try to get out, and even in this weather, I'll try to get out on milder days and do a little bit of shooting. So thank you, Patreon donors, for your assistance, and thanks for watching. If you like this video, give me a thumbs up and hit the subscribe button. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button and the little dingy bell there so you know that I'm around the next time. God bless.